I'd like to introduce the Honorable Mayor Eric Garcetti, and I'd like to give a little context before he comes out. The perspective of what's happening here in LA, which is unique. Companies like myself are investing tens of millions of dollars in a private-to-public partnership, and you would ask the reasons why. Reasons, number one, renewables make economic sense. As an entrepreneur, I wouldn't do something that didn't make economic sense. As many of you know, in the world of solar now, we can produce energy cheaper than any form of fossil fuel. The next reason is we're at a deflection point, the convergence of technology, as some of you folks have heard from some of the speakers, that as the technology converges, the phenomena of Moore's Law and other factors coming together provide a rich opportunity. In that way, Los Angeles is the leader in multiple areas, in large part led by our leadership. But there's a whole team of city leadership that not only believes in this, but supports it, whether it be David Wright at DWP, Matt Peterson at LABC, who is undertaking a transportation initiative for the 2028 Olympics, whether it be Deborah Flynn at LAX, who has put huge emphasis in the renewable business, or Lauren Faber at the city, who's helping folks coordinate all this. So what does all this result in? It results in the following. LA just finished putting out 150 megs of feed-in tariff, which are solar fields in the city, in basin. It's basically the footprint for the beginning of the future microgrid. LA City is putting out thousands and thousands of EV chargers, more than any other city. The mayor has made a bold move to decommission gas plants and make a commitment, both feet first, that we'll figure it out. What makes this business incredible is it's a self-selective process. I wake up each morning with the excitement of knowing it makes a difference. And my experience in this business, so do many of my peers. So with that, let me introduce the Honorable Mayor Garcetti.
Thank you, Paul, and good morning. How's everybody doing? Great to be back here, and thank you so much to all of you who have taken time to come up to this perch where we overlook this incredible city, can see the ocean in one direction, see our downtown and the basin in the other direction. And I always love coming up here to the Getty because it takes a moment where we can punctuate what feels, at least in my life, and I'm sure in many of your lives, is a giant run-on sentence, that we never have a moment to pause with a comma, or to stop even with a period, to celebrate with an exclamation point, or, as this conference always does, ask with a question mark, what comes next? And I want to thank LABC. We are so blessed. I can say as mayor, I have loved being mayor of this city, and one of those reasons is because of the Los Angeles Business Council, its leadership, to Mary, to the board. And I want to congratulate Mary on her new appointment to the board of Cal ISO. It is incredibly well-deserved. I can't think of somebody better. But when I think back, I've never missed, I don't think, one of these sessions, and I think back of the work that we have done together, LABC and City Hall, together as peers, as collaborators, and as friends. I hope it's been as refreshing for LABC to work with a government that gets to yes, as it has been for me to work with a business group that figures out a way to not reflexively say no. But instead, LABC always says, okay, yes, and let's figure out how to get there together. Together, we've answered some of the most urgent challenges of our time. How do we build a thriving middle class in our city? As the nature of work changes, how do we attract the next generation of good-paying jobs? How do we protect a city and its economy in the midst of climate change? And how can we ensure that our growth and prosperity are shared by everyone, regardless of where she lives and what zip code she comes from? And I know when things get tough, I can count on LABC and the larger LABC community to bring creativity, energy, and an open mind to the most pressing concerns we have. And because this business organization, in many ways, in my mind, reflects the very best impulses of business itself. Innovate, experiment, fail forward, focus not just on companies' bottom lines in the short term, but on communities' long-term strength. We were together when I wanted to raise the minimum wage, and Bloomberg just visited me, and over the last 5 years, Los Angeles has outpaced New York, Chicago, the United States of America when it comes to income growth. We are together, absolutely, deserves a round of applause, and I believe that's a big part of why. We are together to confront the homelessness crisis with Prop HHH, our traffic woes with Measure M, and we fought side by side to defeat Measure S. And you backed our bid as well. Actually, the first letter I sent when I was mayor on the first hour of the first day was to ask the United States Olympic Committee to consider us for the American nominee for the then 2024 Olympics. We didn't win that, but we stayed at the dance, and together with you, we won the 2028 Olympics and Paralympics, bring the Paralympics for the first time and the Olympics back to LA for the third time, and you were there. When you came to us with a feed-in tariff, I carried that legislation as a council member and council president, and we worked together to make sure that our buildings were the greenest buildings that they could be, even in the midst early on, long before people accepted that as a concept and people thought that was an environmental do-gooder thing. You found those building owners who showed savings in the first year at the same time that we said it was the right thing to do for our Earth. And I want to talk to you about one other thing before I get into a few remarks about sustainability. And I look forward to speaking to you about that, but I can't go on talking about building a middle class without mentioning a thing or two about creating the workforce of tomorrow and stopping some of the most expensive problems we have in this state and in this city, from incarceration to homelessness, without talking a little bit about education. In my first term, I poured my energy and my political capital into making sure we could get the resources to confront homelessness and traffic, which to me were the two biggest problems that we faced. And so we did together pass Measure HHH and Measure M, monies that are now just starting to come on board with projects, whether they're rail lines, whether it's transitional housing or more. But this second term, and the 4 years I have left as your mayor, I'm committed, as you saw in January, during the teachers' strike, where we're able to bring often warring sides together with a understanding that a collaborative and cooperative culture is what we need for our children. I said after that we would do much more than just have an employment contract. It was time for a new social contract around education. And I'll be pouring that same energy into a measure that is going to be on a special ballot in June, Measure EE. I was talking with a special education teacher earlier this week who teaches 5-, 6-, and 7-year-old kids in kind of the Little Ethiopia, Fairfax area of Los Angeles. And she said these students that have extraordinary needs spend a lot of time doing tactile work with Play-Doh and other things on the floor. And then she just spent a little time telling me about her carpet, how dirty the rug was that her kids have to go on every single day, how she tries to clean it herself because there aren't enough janitors to do much more than clean the toilets and to clean up around the school before it opens, and how long it has been that she has tried to get that carpet replaced, that the paint was, as she called it, a puke brown color that she couldn't get anybody to change, that these kids came in and she said the message we're telling them is that they do not matter as 5-, 6-, and 7-year-old kids. That's not right. We have 600,000 children of our own here in Los Angeles that attend LAUSD. It's a bigger population than all of Miami. And so I'll be speaking more about it in coming months, but I hope that LABC, I hope all of you will take advantage of this moment where we can do something for those children to reduce their class sizes by 7 students because you can't learn in a class of 48, where we can have a nurse come for more than 1 day a week because kids don't schedule when they're going to get sick, and make our campuses cleaner and safer, and give a chance that those kids will be sitting in these seats just a few years from now when they graduate as well. Now, it's perhaps the most overstated cliche, but it's true. You know, the whole world changes when you become a parent. I became a parent, foster parent first about 10 years ago, and then a parent of a daughter 7 years ago, Maya. And when you feel that anxiety about the world that they see, when they ask you about somebody living on a tent on the street, or they ask you about the future, their future, in the face of a warming planet, giving a speech about climate change is an almost impossible challenge. Because we try to, but we can't give words to just how extraordinary this existential challenge is. But you don't need words to describe what we now feel all around us. We can see it, we can feel the heat and flames in our hillsides. We can see and witness the floods on our streets, the kids that are breathing toxic fumes, health costs in low-income neighborhoods and communities of color, our addiction to plastic and petroleum, a throwaway culture, and a sky that is still, unfortunately, some days thickened with smog. This brewing storm hit me very powerfully during a meeting I had about a month ago with the head administrator for the Western United States of FEMA. And he told me, Eric, in the last 2 years, we have spent as much as the previous 27 years in this country on natural disaster relief. So I don't care if you're a conservationist or a fiscal conservative or both. That's $80 billion we've spent in 2 years from 2016 to today, which equals what we had spent from 1979 up to 2016, just to survive and rebuild. I've often said that leadership isn't tested by what we seek to do and how well we are able to do that, but what we don't expect to happen, and by how well we react to that. I'm proud to say that we've paved more streets in Los Angeles than any administration in LA history, but who cares about potholes if Venice is underwater? Can we begin to reduce 911 response times if our firefighters are always off fighting an even bigger fire somewhere else in our state? Imagine for a moment a Los Angeles overwhelmed with 1 million climate refugees. I don't think we'll be talking much about planning the Olympics and the Paralympics. This crisis has never been more intense, the prognosis never more dire. But as we know, the solutions have never been clearer and the answers more achievable. It's a strange kind of inverse principle that the worse it gets, the quicker the solutions are coming to us and the cheaper that they are. Usually with challenges, it's the opposite, right? Things get tougher, they get more expensive. Wars, poverty, the more that piles on, the more difficult it is to get out from under that. But with this crisis, it's different. As climate change intensifies, every new solution that we come up with saves us exponentially more money and more lives. But the bottom line is this is our generational challenge, a moral imperative, an environmental emergency, and a massive economic opportunity for Los Angeles and this world. And I can't help be anything but optimistic, not only because it's my nature, but also, if history teaches us one thing about human beings, we know how to survive. We will find a way to survive. And there's no other city I'd rather be leading or living in than this one for this fight. And I know that as we lead, other cities and the world join us. When we take a stand, it doesn't matter that our president wants to boost fossil fuel production, because most of America will already be moving towards a low-carbon, green energy world. Now, it's been very exciting for me over the past few months to hear Washington talk about a Green New Deal. And I encourage them to work that out and figure out what that means at the national level. But I'd also say to them, you don't have to look across the aisle in Washington to figure it out. You just need to look across the country, here to LA, where we have embodied what a Green New Deal is all about. In Washington, they've defined it as being two pillars, obviously a sustainability pillar and an economic pillar, that we have to address the environmental crisis that we face while we build more economic equity. Well, 4 years ago, we released the first sustainability plan for the city of Los Angeles. And it was based on just that. We actually put it in 3 categories, the 3 E's: environment, economy, and equity. It was revolutionary at the time. People said, what is equity doing in an environmental plan? But we committed LA to the most aggressive reduction in greenhouse gas emissions in our city's history, with LABC helping us get there. And you've been at this work for decades, helping us pass the Clean LA Solar Program, which has made us the #1 solar city in America, pushing the state to follow LA's lead in renewable energy, and helping hundreds of building owners put power plants where we can consume energy from them on their roofs with a feed-in tariff. That work has made a huge difference, and thank you. But together, we're not just making a difference. Together, we're setting the bar. You can see it on our rooftops. You can see it on our streets where we're pioneering new technologies. You can see it in our economy. And if you take one stat away from this on the economic front, I want you to hear this one. Since I've been mayor, with your help and with a conscious focus, we have created 35,000 new green jobs in Los Angeles. That's more than all the coal jobs that America has lost. It represents about 2/3 of the remaining coal jobs in America in a town with 1% of our nation's population, roughly. That is phenomenal. And it shows our future. So we proved once and for all that cleaner air and a stronger economy go hand in hand. Actually, let me say it more strongly than that. They're not just related, they're interdependent. In 2016, we think it may be the biggest in America, but we had an 11% drop in emissions, carbon emissions from this city. Phenomenal number, 11% in a single year. And in that same year, we saw unemployment drop by 14%. So we know that when we put these things together, that same interdependence we can apply in other places. At our port, where we met our clean air targets 5 years ahead of schedule. At the same time, we moved record cargo through that port. It's why Mayor Garcia of Long Beach, my brother mayor, and I took a pledge in 2017 to create the world's first zero-emissions port by replacing diesel trucks and cargo equipment with zero-emissions technology. And we pursued and received a $41 million grant from the state to get there, which we're doubling down with our own investment. Now, nobody had ever tried this before, at least not since, pre-carbon times. I'm sure ancient Phoenicia had a zero-emissions port. But since then, we have to figure this out ourselves. And I love doing this work because so often leadership is future phobic. Somebody else figure it out first, tell me when it works, and then I'll buy it. Or future passive. Well, somebody else will figure it out, it's going to happen. When LA has been a third philosophy, future guiding, we have the head of our port sitting down with automakers and vehicle makers in Japan and in Oregon saying, here's the market, we will buy it, make it, and help us design it. To be the architects of the future is exciting, and if we can make it work in the ports of LA and Long Beach, we can make it work anywhere. As mayor of the city, I've also tried to position Los Angeles in terms of national and global leadership. That's why I founded and chair Climate Mayors, a bipartisan group of 421 cities spanning more than 47 states, representing more than 70 million Americans, who came together when President Trump said he was withdrawing from Paris to say that we're out. We actually said, no, we're in. And in these states, red and blue, mayors from small towns and big cities, we are committing ourselves to the goals that, quite frankly, even if it had been President Hillary Clinton in the White House, we would be dependent on local governments to enact. So don't worry about that power over there. Don't see the power you have before you exercise it. Power doesn't come from Washington. It comes to Washington from us. And climate mayors know when we share our successes, we all win. We created an electric vehicle purchasing collaborative. To put this in perspective, the cities we brought together to say we want to buy zero-emission vehicles represent 114,000 vehicle purchases in the next few years, $10 billion of investment. Again, we drive a market. We push the technology when we come together, not just one town at a time, but all of us. LA was also one of the first cities to sign on to C40, a global group that I am the vice chair of and running to be chair of this year, of the fossil fuel-free streets declaration, and we pledged to purchase only emission-free buses by 2025. That's right around the corner. And I'm not asking people to do in the private sector what we're not doing ourselves as a business enterprise in government. We have one of the largest municipal EV fleets in the country. And guess what? By going green, we saved $220,000 in fuel over the last few years, and we've driven, with our municipal fleet, 2.5 million electric miles. And of course, with your great help, we passed Measure M, the largest transportation infrastructure measure at the local level in American history ×2. Over the next 40 years, it'll be $120 billion to build 15 rapid transit lines, to think about first-mile, last-mile connections, and, oh, by the way, create 787,000 non-exportable, recession-proof middle-class jobs here in this town that since the end of the Cold War has been looking for those jobs to replace what we lost in our aerospace industry. This is progress. This is the power of our partnership. But now it's 2019 and the world has changed. And as technological innovation accelerates, unfortunately so has climate change. So this year, I'm very proud to announce that we're going to be releasing our Sustainability Plan 2.0, LA's new Green Deal, to lay out even more aggressively, more audaciously, not only how we will uphold the Paris Climate Agreement, but how we will meet a goal that I committed to last summer to become a carbon neutral city, mega city, by 2050. I don't know if you know this, but Los Angeles as a municipal area, metropolitan area, is now the third largest in terms of its economy in the world. Tokyo is about $2 trillion of GMP, as I call it. New York is just over $1 trillion, and we're just under. And we're 22nd in population of megacities, so we are the most productive per capita megacity economically in the world. But we will envision and execute in our Sustainability Plan 2.0 some very simple but difficult principles. One, a Los Angeles where every building is emissions-free by 2050. Two, a place where our entire transportation system is carbon-free. Three, a zero-waste city where we won't send a single piece of trash to a landfill. Four, a city where by 2035 we recycle 100% of our wastewater. Just to put that in perspective, that's like building 3 LA aqueducts. So when I talk about this being a second Mulholland moment, it's a second, third, and fourth Mulholland moment. And finally, a city whose electricity comes from a zero-carbon grid. Those are beautiful things to say. They're easy to say in a speech, but immensely difficult to re-architect all 5 of those for a city and sustain our economy and our life. But this isn't just about reaching these goals. It's important for us not to look at statistics and policies and numbers, but to remind ourselves of the feeling, of what it means to live in a city, the human impact of climate change on the ground every day, so that when we do these policies, we think about the communities that we are enacting these policies in. When we plant nearly 100,000 trees across Los Angeles in the next 3 years, we root them first in those neighborhoods that have had the most impact of climate change, the hottest neighborhoods, often with the poorest residents and disproportionately communities of color, or places where seniors who are headed to the market on a summer day, a walk with no shade, we know can be a matter of literally life and death. So as always, we're not just looking at the environmental impact of this work, but the human impact of this work as well. And, of course, the economic impact, because we need capable hands to do all of this work. That's what gets me excited, seeing a workforce of tomorrow that will be trained by our policies, the tens of thousands of Angelenos who will work installing solar panels, pouring cool pavement that reduces by 10 degrees the heat on our streets, retrofitting buildings with cool roofs. And decades from now, I think we can look back at the LA Green New Deal, having launched not just jobs that last for a year or two, but careers for a lifetime that also bring pollutions to new lows and power our economy to new highs. This ambition is not abstract. Cities are laboratories of action. So here's my advice to Washington in conclusion as they go through figuring out our national policies and they join us in this fight. To candidates who are running for president, even if you're the incumbent, listen closely. First, go big. Don't worry about the naysayers and keep pushing forward. I can guarantee, and we've all seen even at this conference, whatever seems like radical ideas one year, a year or two later seem timid. Consider when I took an LA zero emissions pledge a few years ago, people literally said we were crazy, that it was not scientifically possible in our lifetimes. And lo and behold, not only did we make that pledge, the state followed our lead and entire nations are ready to join us. Second piece of advice is don't be afraid of making a mess, which I know Washington is good at. But I mean in this sense, some of this work is going to be messy. Some of us might feel that it's too politically risky. As I was saying before, let somebody else figure it out. But it's much better to fail forward than to be caught in the past. And wouldn't you rather be part of creating that change, designing it, than having somebody else's blueprint try to fit into your city? Yes, like the rollout of electric scooters in a city is messy. It's complicated. But people are voting with their feet to get out of cars. Let's figure out a way to embrace that, make people safe, clean up the sidewalks, but not say no. And if LA figures out how to use the revenue from scooters to create more first-mile, last-mile connections, that helps our public transportation investment, which is over $100 billion. Third piece of advice, never lose sight of the bottom line. A shift towards sustainability isn't just about our physical survival. We have to continue, as I've done in this speech, to talk about the economic benefit. I call this moment in human history the age of excitement. I invented a new word, and feel free to crib it. It's anxiety with excitement, right? You know what I'm feeling about? It's like, oh my gosh, I can FaceTime with my daughter from across the country when I'm on a trip and tuck her into bed, but will that technology put her out of work? Will, the cures that we find for diseases that are so incredible, will we match that ambition with allowing people to be able to pay for their health care and not be one accident away from traumatic economic experience? So in this age of excitement, we have to talk to people about the economics of this moment and how this isn't just of benefit. This is the only way out of the economy that we have right now. Jobs in Los Angeles won't disappear, but they will change. And if we don't have them here, we will all suffer. So by adopting sustainability standards early, we've seen in Los Angeles our unemployment rate plummet. Don't we want that for our nation as well? We need those programs and partnerships to train workers in the industries of tomorrow, to define the technologies of the future, and capitalize on future market that values electricity over emissions. My friends, we are up for this. Our parents and our grandparents, think of what they did. They survived and won great wars. They got us to the moon. They weathered depression. They brought water to this parched pueblo. And now we have the moment to write our chapter in the history book of this city, of this nation, and of humanity itself. If too many of us wait for others to lead, it will be too late. And just because no one has done it before doesn't mean that we won't. I don't know if there's Princess Bride fans in here, but I found that moment when our heroine says, "We won't survive, we'll never survive, and her savior says, "Well, Buttercup, you're just saying that because nobody before ever has." And it's true, humanity, we're only here for a short period of time. None of us will survive. The question is, will we as humanity survive? Will we as a city survive? Will we as a nation survive? And will human beings be able to inhabit this earth that will long live after us? But because Los Angeles understands, in the words of the poet Robert Browning, that our reach must always exceed our grasp, we might not be able to hold the moment. We won't all be around for when those goals are achieved, but we will know that we did that so that our children and our grandchildren can hold that future, can enjoy this city, can live out their dreams, and indeed be that city of angels that we are. Thank you all. Let's go do it. Thank you.
Now, please welcome our next panel, Growing California's Clean Energy Economy, with moderator Michael Northrup, Program Director of Sustainable Development with the Rockefeller Brothers Foundation.
Thank you, Mayor Garcetti. That was great. Thank you very much.
I think 10 seconds.
Thank you all for your doggedness to continue to listen to this not simple set of stories that you're hearing from this stage today. It's remarkable. We're really in a time of implementation now. I think in past years we talked about the need for policy, right? We needed these 100% renewable energy policies, zero energy buildings, fully electrified transportation systems, et cetera, zero waste, the mayor said. And we've entered this place where we're trying to figure out how to do it. And it's a lot more complicated than talking about the need for a policy. So, again, thank you for sitting here and listening and paying attention. Thanks to the LABC for putting on an event like this. And thanks to all of you for being here to talk about it and try to make it clear. And that's not the easiest task in the world. So we've got about an hour, a little bit more, and we're going to range through a whole bunch of topics from electricity to buildings to transportation, and a bunch of pieces that connect them over the course of the next hour or so. We're going to try to do it in fairly rapid fire and informal form, trying not to bore you too much with lots and lots of detail. And we'll all be around after for questions and answers if you want to dig deeper with any of us as we go. So anyway, let's see how we do here. Laura, you and Chris Holden and Nancy Skinner and Kevin DeLeon pushed this amazing bill through the legislature last year that called for 100% renewable energy in the state of California. So maybe Hawaii beat you by a couple months, but they have a different set of challenges there and a much more favorable economic situation actually too, because they have such high-priced fossil fuel power. But it was really a huge advance to see that happen. And when the governor signed that bill at the Governor's Climate Action Summit in San Francisco at the end of the year last year, the whole world took notice. And you now see governors all over the country saying that they want to do the same thing. I think every Democratic governor that got elected in the last midterm elections said 100% renewable energy was something that they wanted to do in their state. So you've already had a huge impact just getting everybody to go, and follow. So as you think about what's coming up in this next legislative session or even over the next couple legislative sessions, what else is the legislature thinking about in terms of advancing this giant goal? What else do you need to do? How do you think about it?
Oh, thanks. It's a pleasure to be here. I really appreciate everybody's interest in this very important topic. So we're certainly doing very well when it comes to renewable generation in California. We're heading in all the right directions, but there are areas that we do have to focus on. My fabulous friend from San Francisco, Senator Scott Wiener, has a bill that he's introduced to look at interconnectivity between individual households and to look at how storage fits into that equation. There are still barriers to storage. There's still technological and regulatory in a lot of areas, barriers to generation, even for some large business customers, as many of you who are in business probably have run into. And people that are interested in things like more solar in California or offshore wind are learning that pulling permits to bring these large commercial industrial projects online also isn't the easiest thing to do. But while we're going in the right direction with emissions, with generation, there's a lot of other areas that we need to look at when it comes to carbon neutrality. So there's been a lot in the news lately about how we're going in the wrong direction when it comes to transportation. So there's a lot of work to be done in that area, looking at our transportation in terms of heavy vehicles, but also the cars that we all drive, how transit fits into the equation, where we make our investments as municipalities and as a state. And then there are other carbon generators that really contribute a lot that we're starting to look at more. Our waste stream, agriculture, and emissions from methane. And these are areas that are relatively new for the state to start examining, so there's a lot of work. And I would say with SB 100 and all of the efforts that are out there, we have a myriad of state agencies. It's a virtual alphabet soup, of PUCs and CECs and CARB, and they all have a role to play as well. And I think a lot of those agencies are also grappling with what is their responsibility in terms of implementation, but also in policy making. So that's another area that the legislature's taking a look at.
Great. A lot to do. That's amazing. So,
A lot to do.
Yeah. Ted, you now run this thing called the Clean Power Alliance, is that right?
Yes.
And it's a community choice aggregator in the kind of alphabet soup of acronyms. We call them CCAs now. As a New Yorker, I'm extremely jealous of CCAs because we actually have a policy on the books, but we haven't really figured out how to implement it yet. California's been working on this, of course, way ahead of everybody else for the last several years, and it looks like CCAs are growing like crazy in the state. And your CCA, the Clean Power Alliance, is the biggest CCA in the state. You have 1 million customers. A lot of them are here in the Los Angeles Valley. You've already done so much. What should Angelinos be expecting from the Clean Power Alliance going forward, and where are you headed? How do you think about this ambition as it moves ahead?
Yeah, thank you. Yes, and as of we're one of 19 operating CCAs in the state, but as of February, when we rolled over about 925,000 residential customers, we did become the largest CCA in the state. But it's not so much about, from my perspective, about the CCAs, and we're now also the 5th largest load-serving entity in the state. So, up there with Edison and PG&E and DWP and SDG&E in terms of not only our responsibility for being really good players in the electricity system and helping the state figure out how all the pieces work together, but also in terms of our ambition. And so I'll just sort of say three things about where we are now and where we're going. So the first thing is among those 900+ thousand customers that we have, about 275,000 of them are on 100% renewable energy rate plans today. So that's 10 cities across LA and Ventura counties that are now 100% renewables in 2019. Very, very exciting. And one thing that we thought a lot about as we rolled on those customers is not everybody can pay for that. So I think one of the things that we've done and that shows abilities of CCAs to innovate is that in those 10 jurisdictions that are 100% renewable energy, all low-income FARA customers are getting that 100% renewable energy product at no additional cost, at the same cost they would be paying Edison, including their discount. And that's an internal subsidy that our board provided of about $5 million just straight out of the gate. So we believe in pushing forward the getting to 100% as much more quickly than 2045, but doing it in an equitable and accessible way. So that's the first thing. The second piece where we're going to be playing a lot in is we have now a lot of customer demand for renewables, and we have to go out and procure long-term contracts. So we're currently under negotiations for about 800 megawatts of new capacity. We expect to sign most of those contracts in the next couple of months. And much of that is solar, but also a lot of solar plus storage. I think going forward, we can't just keep dumping solar onto the grid, and we need to think about how it fits together. So a number of our contracts are solar plus storage, and we're also investing, be the first CCA to invest in standalone battery energy storage, which leads to the third piece, which is where are we going to put that standalone storage, and how does that integrate not just into the reliability of the grid, but in terms of resiliency overall. I think one of the strengths of the CCA business model is that we are governed by local governments, and it's local governments who are on the front lines of resiliency in terms of how we adapt to climate change. And so the first storage project that we're looking at is in a fire-impacted area out of the Woolsey fire in Moore Park, in an area that's also capacity constrained. And then thinking about how that will serve as a building block for a bunch of local action throughout our territory to adapt. I want to give a shout out to the assembly members got a bill 1144, which takes some existing incentive money and really tries to target it at fire-impacted areas and thinking about how we can reduce the impacts of the power shutoffs that are coming and that are going to be needed, and really provide those building blocks. So I think for us, it's getting our customers onto 100% renewable energy as quickly as possible in an accessible and affordable way, really getting new steel in the ground in terms of our overall renewable energy capacity and integrating that into the grid, and then really working at the local level on the resiliency aspect and how the electricity sector can contribute to that.
That's great. Again, just to say, in New York, and we're not alone, we don't have choice. We have a utility, and we buy our power from an electric utility, and that's it. And they don't offer 100% plans. So it is an incredible step forward, and the fact that millions of people are taking advantage of it, and many of them are not paying a premium, is unbelievably positive. So it's great. So, Tom, we just heard about solar plus storage, and we heard about 100% renewable energy. And so you're going to have this terrific problem in California where you're going to have all this renewable energy on the grid, And for all kinds of technical reasons, that can be an issue that creates all sorts of problems for wires and customers and utilities and managing all this stuff. So storage is like a really big part of the future. 8-Minute Energy, as I understand it, has about 14,000 megawatts. Is that right? 14,000 megawatts of solar and storage already operational. And you've got another 3,000 megawatts that you're looking to deploy. Can you just say, I mean, it sounds solar plus storage. What does that mean? What are you talking about? And what does it do? And how should we be thinking about this in the sort of general operation of the grid moving forward? And how much more do we need?
So let me just correct that. We have about 3,000 megawatts operational and 14,000 megawatts under development,
Okay.
all across the U.S.
I'm much too excited. So.
Today, we power about 10% of Los Angeles, coming from power plants that we developed and built, which I'm very proud of, being an Angelino. Our company is based here in Los Angeles. What we're seeing right now in our industry is a shift going away from renewable or solar only to solar plus storage. And not only is storage needed in the context of, obviously we need power at night as well, or after the sun goes down, there's a huge peak in the late evening hours. But a big driver is also, if you look at the biggest constraint that we have today, it is transmission and distribution. And we need to start thinking kind of backwards from what does the load look like? Ted talked about being a load-serving entity. That's a terminology in the utility world. That's his problem. He needs to service the load. And so we need to kind of design backwards and say, how do I provide a power plant that services his load? And that has to do with how do I get the power to the customer? How do I utilize those billions of dollars of transmission system in a way that is cost-effective? And the last 10 years, we built just solar power plants. We had a capacity factor, meaning how much utilization do we have, of somewhere around 30%. The load is more like 60 to 70%. So today, we're designing power plants that incorporate large amounts of storage to match the load and have a capacity factor of 60 to 70%. I'm sure David would agree, which is from a utilities perspective, the idea of building new transmission is not only expensive, but it's also very risky because there's a lot of permitting involved, and it takes a lot of time. So the theme of, we need to do something now and we need to do it fast is totally contradictory to, I need to build more transmission. Not saying we shouldn't attack that as an issue as well in terms of legislature and trying to figure out how we can advance that, but it is a reality that we live with right now. So I think it is imperative to add storage to all solar facilities, especially in places like California where we have high penetration of renewables. We are now fortunate, and 5 years ago that was not possible, we're now fortunate we can provide solar power at a cost that's about 40% cheaper than the cheapest fossil fuel. If we add storage, and I'm talking about massive amounts of storage, we're talking gigawatt hour of storage capacity that's needed to run our economy, we can offer that now at the same cost as a modern, high-efficiency, combined cycle gas turbine power plant. So there's no more reason from an economic perspective to build any more gas-fired power plants. And I applaud the mayor for his decision that he announced a few weeks ago to not replace any of the coastal gas units. I know David, his engineers, scratched their heads and said, okay, challenge heard. Let's figure out how to actually do that. We do think that is very doable, and we can now do it cost-effective. Yeah. And that's a really important point. We've seen that in some of the markets where renewables have driven the price up for consumers, and net metering ends up being a subsidy where folks that cannot afford or can't put solar on their roof end up paying the bills for homeowners that can put solar on their roof. So we have to be careful in terms of policy that we don't end up creating a backlash where renewables are seen as the reason why our bills go up. That is not necessary anymore. We can do renewables cost effective today, as Ted here knows, his rates, his 100% renewable energy rates are very competitive. So we can do that today, and that is a huge step forward that technology has allowed us to now actually not just decarbonize, but also stabilize the cost of electricity. And that is important for an economy to grow, and it's important to get support from the population at large that this is not costing us huge amounts of money and shifting it, especially to those who can't afford it.
It's one of the great things that's happened. The market is our friend on this stuff, finally, so we're able to go faster. Thanks, that's fantastic. Great story. Andrew, you know, Andrew is the guy who pushed forward a huge amount of the work to get buildings in the state to be zero carbon or net zero energy. And you know, the fact that California has a mandate that all new residential buildings will be net zero by 2020, or all new buildings built from 2020 forward will be net zero, and that all residential buildings and that all commercial buildings will be net zero beginning in 2030 is just such a huge thing. It's another one of these things the rest of the country just scratches their head at and goes, how did that happen? So you guys are in the role of trying to figure that out. One of the big challenges is that heating and cooling in most of the country is the biggest part of the energy load in a home or a building. And a lot of the power for that, for heating and cooling, is natural gas. So if you're going to move to a place where you're net zero, you probably have to turn that into electric power that is powered by renewables. So you have to electrify the building, and there's new equipment, new technology, et cetera. So just, you know, as you're thinking about how you get this shift inside all these buildings across California, what are you going to do to make that happen?
Yeah. So thanks, Michael, for moderating, and thanks everybody for coming. I love this event because it's always sort of LA putting a stake in the ground and sort of saying, okay, here's our build challenge for the next year, and it's really good calibration that happens every year, so I really enjoy this. And all of you are knowledgeable professionals, really high quality conversation. So just to sort of summarize what we actually did in the latest update of the building code, it's true that we've had this policy goal to go net zero energy residential by 2020, commercial by 2030. At the same time, the Energy Commission, in order to actually propose a building code and make it into a regulation, has to find cost effectiveness. So we have to really dig in, work with industry stakeholders, the builders, all the trade allies, all the environmental, consumer, you know, the whole gamut of stakeholders in the construction industry to figure out what the least cost pathway to achieve our goals actually is and find cost effectiveness. So what we were able to find in this round was that we could find relatively small solar systems to be cost effective in a dual fuel home. So the home, you know, still can have natural gas. And it would have a 2.5, 3 kW PV system that is absolutely cost effective for that homeowner. And so that was a pretty easy finding to make. We were not able to find cost effectiveness yet with residential storage, for example, but what we did was we opened a voluntary channel so that people can install storage, use it for compliance for the building code, and that helps open the market for storage. And we know that the builders are really interested in doing that. And so I'm anticipating over the next few years, we're going to see a real scale up of residential storage that's going to get the cost down, and then we can revisit that cost effectiveness conversation in the next code update. So where it's interesting, during the course of this policy goal, since the mid-2000s, we've had this policy goal, which back in 2007, when we had the conversation originally, you know, we, California, had this conversation originally, you know, it was really sort of a small is beautiful thing. You know, it was like net zero energy, that's our goal, it's a pie in the sky goal, and it was really seemed very far off. And we've seen transformation of markets between then and now, and we've also seen a shift towards carbon and away from sort of just net zero energy per se, and I think that's a really important shift to highlight. A net zero building is not a net carbon zero. A net zero energy building is not a net zero carbon building. Okay, and in fact, two identical buildings that have identical PV systems and maybe are both net zero will have vastly different carbon footprints. Okay, and so now in the policy sort of regime where we need to focus our efforts is on on carbon and sort of not necessarily on just this hermetically sealed, like the building envelope. The building produces all the energy it consumes over the course of a year, because all those kilowatt hours aren't created equal. So we're shifting towards now metrics that have more to do with carbon and less sort of to do with setting goals based on energy per se. So I think that's a really important, it's kind of wonky, but it's a really important shift. Assemblymember Friedman actually sponsored a bill that became law last year, AB 3232, which has us doing a building decarbonization plan at the Energy Commission, which we're really starting to get going on in earnest. And I'm really excited about that because it's going to force us to really think through these difficult issues of how do we wean our building stock from natural gas? Do we have to do it everywhere? What is the endpoint for the natural gas system? So that's this is a huge sunk infrastructure that we have that ratepayers are one way or the other going to be on the hook for. And, what is that pathway to get there? What's the role of renewable natural gas? And kind of there's a large policy discussion that we have to marshal to figure out how to get from where we are now to where we need to be in terms of carbon. And so the gas regime is really going to have to change. So we've managed to do some of that. Last thing I'll say is, if it used to be that there was, just because of the vagaries of the building code, there was a bit of a penalty to be paid. It was more difficult to build an all-electric building than it really had to be. And so in the last round, we really we leveled that playing field. So if you want to build an all-electric building, an all-electric home, you can do that, and there is no penalty in the code. And in fact, there's a new baseline, and there's all these facilities to do it. And so local jurisdictions who are key to all of this can actually sort of key off of that and do local codes and local mandates that sort of push the all-electric market in the context of their own climate planning. Mm-hmm. So the state and local governments, I think, really can develop positive synergies on all this. That's a really key dynamic.
Okay, thanks. That's great. So David, you run the largest municipal utility in the United States, LABC. You've moved in all kinds of interesting ways. You're going to be off coal by 2027 as a utility, I hear. So you'll shut that down. You've already knocked a lot of it out of the system. There's more coming soon. And you've had this very successful feed-in tariff program that is now fully subscribed, we heard today. And you recently decided and were mandated to replace all those cooling plants with renewables, the three plants that are out there, the Haynes, the Harbor, and the Scattergood plants. So that's 1,600 megawatts that you've got to suddenly get renewables online to power. So I'm just, could you just say a little bit about how you're going to do that, and maybe just reflect a little bit on the feed-in tariff program and what's coming next with that too?
Sure. So it was great to be here and see everybody. It's an exciting, using your term mandate, but goal, direction. It's part of our strategic long-term plan, strategic long-term resources plan, where we look every couple years at where we're going, where we're going to be in 5, 10, 15, 20, 30 years. And so this has shifted that a little bit. And it's a very exciting thing to work on. Our engineers, one of them said, and I remembered it very distinctly, we have to reimagine our electric system. And I really like that term because it was completely comprehensive. So we are looking at every availability of renewable resources, storage, combination, location. We'll obviously have the feed-in tariff. We'll have wind coming in, more imported, local solar, utility grade, remote solar. But we really are looking at in-basin resources as a component of that. And so just kind of moving right to that fully subscribed feed-in tariff program, we are going through a 2-year study that gets to really set that roadmap on how we replace those 1,600 megawatts of fossil fuel with renewable resources and storage. But between now and then, we don't want to stop the momentum of the feed-in tariff program. So in about 60 days, we'll be going to our board for consideration of an additional 50 megawatts every year for the next 3 years. But on top of that is truly the goal to not say no. So if we got 70 megawatts the first year, we'd go back to our board and say, can we do 70 megawatts, which I have to fully, can't ever predict and force, tell what a board's going to vote for. But I can't imagine there wouldn't be a full support for that effort. So, and we want to get that moving because we don't want to wait for a 2-year plan to be developed and finished. This is an exciting program. Likely the price will stay the same, the components will stay the same. I always like to look at, it was 150 megawatts, but 3 projects consume 20% of that. 15 megawatt project by the port on Westmont Distribution, 10 megawatts on a postal service facility in South LA, and then 5 megawatts on the Forever 21 distribution. So if we can get, a dozen more of those, that's going to be amazing for local storage. We'll then be at about the same time issuing an RFI for distributed energy resources. We are only going to get to the goal that we need to get with the really cooperation and partnerships of regulators, policymakers, private companies, researchers, the LADWP. It's going to require everybody to have a seat at the table to bring their ideas together and figure out how we're going to get there. When the mayor announced this, it was really just really wonderful because he and every other council person that spoke said, we don't quite know how we're going to get it. It's going to be a really big challenge, and I have to echo that it is going to be a really big challenge, and it's going to require some of that reimagining of our power system. But the way we can get a lot of that information is by issuing this RFI for these distributed energy resources and get the ideas of everybody. Here's something that we could bring to the table. We're then looking at later in the summer, right now this is like the working title, of FIT-B, which would be feed-in tariff plus battery storage. We really do need to get to where Tom said, there should be storage on every system that we're looking at. We should be moving in that direction. Tom and I had a chance to talk a few times over the last couple weeks, and resources are an issue, but a really big issue is the infrastructure that delivers those resources to customers, the transmission, the distribution, and it takes a really long time to build a transmission line to go through the entire process. It can be a decade. And right now, the current prediction is we need several hundred miles of transmission based on the current way everything is to move forward and deliver that power. So, we're also then just a couple other things looking at compressed air energy storage, and again, locating that in strategic, the location is strategic. Looking at pump storage, which we have at Castaic, and we're looking at doing that at the Hoover Dam, so a huge project. Wow. So a lot of different approaches to meet those goals, some of whose technologies aren't completely evolved yet, but they will get there, and using the technologies which are already in existence, but boy, the price has gone so far down beyond anything I think anybody could predict even 5 and 7 years ago.
That's great. Well, this great sort of dynamic of big policy objectives, then promising to get there, add a little creativity, overperform. We've just got to keep doing that. So that'll be good. Gladys, so you and the California environmental justice community have had a huge role over the last 10 years, making sure that all of this stuff we've been talking about reaches down into disadvantaged communities and that the benefits are equitably shared across the state. It hasn't always been easy, right? And it's been contentious all along the way, and even recently it's continued to be contentious. But how are you feeling? Are we on the right, is California on the right track? And what else needs to happen to make sure that those goals of equity and social justice, really stay front and center for everybody?
Yeah, thank you for that question, and good morning to everyone, and thank you to the LA Business Council for inviting the California Environmental Justice Alliance, CEJA, to participate on this distinguished panel. So California and the city of Los Angeles have made huge strides, significant progress, as we have just heard, and we're far advanced and beyond even other progressive states like New York. And we're now with SB 100s, set on a path to reach 100% renewable energy. It's extremely exciting. However, these benefits and the opportunities are not reaching all communities. There is a huge green divide currently. Communities that are at the front lines of the fossil fuel-based energy economy are not seeing these benefits. And if we're not very intentional about including equitable processes and values at the center of how we advance in developing and implementing policies and technology, we're going to further widen this gap. And we do not want an energy apartheid, which we're set to be on. We also need to be very mindful of the health, safety, and other impacts that these communities have borne for very long that have largely been neglected. So as the 5th largest economy, we are set to take advantage of this transformation and ensure that all communities can benefit from both the economic and the health impacts and welfare of the transformation. So, while the global community, we're all now facing this existential crisis from climate change, these communities at the front lines of fossil fuel operations have been in a crisis for many decades. Again, their health and safety impacted, and they have been advocating for progress in their communities, and now there is a threat multiplier of climate change that is hitting these communities first and worst. So, carbon-emitting facilities, as you see behind you, from refineries, oil drilling operations, gas plants, they are disproportionately located in low-income communities and communities of color. These are all facilities in Los Angeles. So in Los Angeles, we're actually, we host the largest refinery center in the Western United States. We have drilling that happens throughout neighborhoods in which families are literally raising their kids next to fossil fuel operations. And they're exposed to, again, risks of respiratory diseases to cancer. And in California, we know that pollution follows lines of race. So 1 in 3 African American and Latinos live in the 20% top polluted communities versus 1 in 14 white residents. So we need to, again, craft policies that start by protecting the most vulnerable communities, and those are going to be the policies that are most efficient and effective for everyone. So we've done a lot of things right in California, as we've just heard. We've had a really exciting innovation. We've had policies like the Solar on Multifamily Affordable Housing Act, or program that CEJA helped move forward, and that is an unprecedented program that invests $1 billion over 10 years to ensure that we bring solar rooftop to low-income apartment buildings, so that we ensure that we're creating jobs, that we're bringing economic benefits to tenants, and that we're normalizing this technology in those communities. We have SB 100, we have EPIC, which is a program that is administered by the Energy Commission that ensures that there is real meaningful investment in technology deployment and demonstration in disadvantaged communities. So in terms of what we have to do still, there's a lot for us to do. One is to meet our climate goals, we need policies that reduce emissions directly at the source, so that we're not simply continuing to allow for trading of emissions. Actually, recent research shows that emissions from the largest sources of emissions, such as refineries, again, like the ones we have here in LA and in Richmond, those have actually increased after cap and trade. So those communities are now having their health and impact, the safety impacts from air pollution, toxic and air criteria pollutants actually now exacerbated as a result of these policies. So if we cut emissions at the source, we're also cutting the air pollutants. Now, in terms of energy efficiency, we need to absolutely increase investments and decrease the demand for natural gas by focusing on those disadvantaged communities. When you replace gas-fired appliances and you electrify your home, you're decreasing your bills. So you're seeing an economic benefit that's putting more money in your pocket for all the other necessities of life. If, however, we have whole communities that are electrifying their homes and other communities that don't have access to or aren't able to afford doing the same and cannot electrify, as was noted, the cost of maintaining the gas system is shifted to those communities. So low-income communities already bear a disproportionate burden. For example, they pay, low-income households pay between 1/3 and half of their income just for energy alone. So if we're not, again, careful about including centering equity in these policies, these burdens and the economic costs can actually increase for low-income communities. We also need to make sure that we have anti-displacement measures as we're developing policies to ensure that, as landlords, for example, invoke benefits to electrify homes and do upgrades and retrofits, that they're not also increasing rents or creating other displacement consequences. In terms of distributed energy, demand response, solar, storage, those must be developed and also be implemented equitably. We need to include different creative forms of financing to ensure it's available to low-income communities and communities of color. Community solar is a viable alternative that needs to be improved and be made accessible to all communities. LADWP actually has a really neat pilot program right now on community solar, and we need more of those pilot projects. Let's see, electrifying transportation. We know that transportation is the largest source of emissions in our state, and the greatest source comes from medium and heavy-duty trucks that are diesel trucks. And African Americans and Latinos are exposed to 40% more vehicle pollution than other community members. So even air pollution from transportation is not distributed equally. So we need to ensure that we're transforming medium and heavy duty truck fleets first and foremost to ensure that we're also lifting the health and safety impacts from those communities. We need to ensure that these are zero emission electric trucks. We need to also develop public transportation to ensure that we have alternative sources and zero emission sources available to disadvantaged communities. And we also need to make passenger electric vehicles accessible to low-income communities through not just incentives such as rebates, but other alternative financing mechanisms. Now, in terms of the demand side, again, we've made huge strides when it comes to supply demand side. In terms of supply side, we need to transition off of fossil fuel sources. And that is one of the biggest challenges for our state and all of our cities right now. We don't have a comprehensive plan of how we're going to get off of natural gas and oil. So we need a phase-out plan. We need to stop expanding oil and natural gas operations, and we also need to create very common sense buffer zones for health and safety reasons to ensure that we don't have children growing up next to operations that are emitting benzene and other carcinogens, particulate matter, and use hydrofluoric acid, which is a deadly chemical. So those are some of the areas in which we have a lot of room to still grow in. They are challenging, but again, have so much, they're really ripe benefits to ensure that all communities can benefit from this transformation, and that, again, the health burdens that are really unconscionable that have been borne by those most vulnerable communities are lifted.
That's great. So it's not a short list. If there was a discordant note at the Governor's Climate Action Summit in San Francisco last November, it was the protesters outside saying that California needed to get off being stop being an oil developing state. And, I think a lot of advocates were hoping that the new governor would begin to take that up and sort of distinguish himself by, working on the supply side and not just the demand side, as you said. So we'll see what happens. And so anyway, but thanks for all that. We asked Laura a few minutes ago what were the things that were coming up to kind of push forward the 100% renewable work that was really moving quickly, but what else should we be looking out for from the legislature this year? What else do you have on the docket that we should be trying to get behind to be helping you with?
Goodness, that was a very comprehensive list of, I think, ongoing policy work and a lot of the challenges and making sure that we really understand the effects on communities of the policies that we pass, and making sure that we have a way of hearing those concerns as they bubble up from communities, so that there's formalized ways of understanding the impacts of the various policies that we create. So I chair the Natural Resources Committee in the Assembly, and it's a committee that has a lot of this subject matter under it, and we share a lot of the energy work with the Utilities Commission. And I know you heard from Chris Holden a little bit earlier. My committee oversees not just somewhat of the clean energy portion, but also air quality, the air quality districts, recycling, forestry, and CAL FIRE, which has all of a sudden become a much bigger part of the air quality equation. And so a lot of the bills that we're seeing right now in the committee have to do with trying to mitigate the effects of forest fire, and rural members of the legislature who have been saying for a long time, you know, you're focusing so much attention on emissions from energy and from transportation, but you've got this potential of this huge amount of greenhouse gas emissions from forest fire if we don't get the forest kind of under control, and certainly that's been borne out. So as a committee chair, my role is not only to generate bills in the area, which I do, but also to be sort of the gatekeeper and vetter of all of the bills that come to the legislature in all of these various areas. And that's a big job for me and amongst myself. And a lot of these bills are double referred. So, you know, I'm co-authoring a bill with Phil Ting, for instance. It's a sort of second try at mandating that all cars in California after a certain point have to be EVs. Well, that bill was just held in the Transportation Committee and will not be heard. So sometimes the work is also trying to navigate important bills through the process. Now, I don't have any desire to have my name on every single important bill that comes through. As a chair, I also go out and try to identify the bills that really enact these policies that are important in all of these different spaces, and try to shepherd them through my committee and then through the floor and onwards, and to really work with the authors. So we sit down a lot with authors of other bills, with my committee staff and myself, and work on the policies to try to make those bills the best they can be. And then to also make sure that we have that 10,000-foot viewpoint, because the bills that come through, you know, there'll be a piece over here and a piece over here and a piece over here. And maybe this piece that's like an ag bill also fits in because it has to do with methane, and try to put that all together so that I think we have something like 1,000 bills right now moving through the process, that at the end, whatever gets through turns into something that resembles a comprehensive policy and a comprehensive roadmap. And then at the other end of it are all of the agencies that then have to take all of these bills that get signed and implement them with all of the policy priorities that we already know that we have. And when it works well, it's also a two-way street, and we hear from PUC and we hear from CEC commissioners who say, listen, we have this goal in place, but we really need help legislatively to do this or do that. Or sometimes we'll say, hey, we have this mandate, but there's no regs yet. So what do we need to do to get the agency to write the regulations so that we can get this working on the ground? Now, I don't even remember your question at this point. I'm hoping that that was something of an answer, but I wanted to put it into the legislative perspective of what we do to impact all of this. And then we also, you know, we do hearings like we just had the EJ community come up for a very long hearing where we looked at for the first time how the new air quality monitoring work was going. And so every single air district in the state that was involved in now the new monitoring system for disadvantaged communities came with their EJ communities and sat down one by one and said, and had PowerPoints and said, here are the emitters and the problems in our areas, here's what's unique to our area, and here's how we've been working. And it was fascinating because some districts came in and it was like kumbaya, everyone was so happy, we have this formal process for the first time and it's going so great. And then other districts came in and there's still a lack of trust and there's still a disconnect between the air quality districts and the EJ communities and the communities. And so trying to get from that, what are the best practices? What separates the ones that seem to be moving ahead and succeeding from the ones that maybe aren't? And is it just past history, or can we learn lessons and then try to move that into all of the different districts in the state? So there's a lot of new policies that are in place that we not just have to pass, but we have to oversee and see how they're working. And now that the term limits are different in the legislature, and instead of being a 6-year member, I am potentially, if the public wants me to be, a 12-year member. Now, rather than just focusing on passing the policies, we should be spending a lot more time looking back retrospectively, but also doing the oversight to make sure that those goals that were put into statute are actually now happening in real life on the ground. So I do see members starting to understand that and have a bit of a shift towards what they're going to focus, focus their time on.
I wonder if there are any other states with 1,000 bills moving through the natural.
Well, a lot of them are dying very quickly. They don't feel any better. We're
Still.
Yeah.
Culling process.
It's a big culling process.
It's a lot of stuff. That's amazing. Well, good on you. God bless you going forward. So, Andrew, we're just going to dig in a little bit on a few things and do a little bit more of a lightning round over the next kind of 25 minutes that we've got left. So, microgrids. The California Energy Commission put $50 million out for demonstration work on microgrids. Could you just say a little bit, what is a microgrid and how do they advance all the goals we care about, and what's happening with them? What's the trajectory of microgrid development in California?
Yeah, so there's an amazing amount of integration going on with all the technologies that are being developed, control and communications technologies, and microgrids have been a kind of a focus of that sort of development. One thing that I want to say just across the board is, with all of the electrification discussion and all the new loads, EVs, and heating and cooling that's going to be fuel switched into the electric system likely, energy efficiency becomes just even more hugely important. We have a long history in California of doing energy efficiency, but we need headroom in our distribution grid in order to accommodate all these new loads. And so this integrated approach with demand response that Gladys mentioned and really heavy energy efficiency, deep retrofits of our existing building stock. And one way we got the building code passed that I talked about before was we focused first on efficiency. These are incredibly efficient shells and mechanical systems that are in these buildings. So you actually don't need that much power to power them. And so that's really the optimal, most cost-effective approach. And it's the most sensible approach. It's the best management approach. It's just kind of the best, most rational approach and the best for the customer. Demand response, also depends on a lot of technologies. Microgrids started life as a little bit, and I'd say they still somewhat have this reputation, justifiably, that they're a little bit of a luxury because they do require some investment. They typically have been, hospitals and sort of remote communities like Borrego Springs. The Commission has sponsored over the last 25 years, tens of millions of dollars of research on microgrids. And so increasingly, though, the technologies that are being produced for these specific places like hospitals and campuses and things that lend themselves to microgrids because it improves local resilience and sort of local optimization of all these different demand DERs, these distributed energy resources. It allows you to island, microgrid allows you to island a little part of the electric grid and still have service. And so, where you had high value service like hospitals and remote communities, it made a lot of sense. The technologies that are allowing that to happen are now relevant across the distribution grid, whether you call it a microgrid or not. And so I think we're seeing a lot of spillover from that research to just be able to do demand response in a way that's aggregatable and biddable into the wholesale markets. And we have to manipulate demand. I think, Tom, you said this. We have to be able to focus on the demand side in order to, we don't just need supply that can meet demand. We need demand that can accommodate supply. And so that two-way street now depends on a lot of technology, data flows. We're working really hard on getting, data around where it needs to be, sort of the hemoglobin of all this. It's carrying all this information around so that this ecosystem can thrive. And so microgrids have, I think, been a platform for research that it started life as sort of a wonky technical thing. Oh, we can do this. But now the benefits are spilling across the board, and they're going to help us manage our distribution grid in a way that's best for ratepayers.
Yeah, great. Tom, you're thinking a lot about the grid. as you look around at what's happening, and you've talked already a lot about solar and storage, but what else do policymakers need to be thinking about in terms of the grid? What investments need to come to really make this grid do all the things that it has to do as we head into this 100% renewable future?
Well, first of all, I think the mandate, for example, for LADWP, and I commend LA for having taken a very positive attitude towards, what is a large engineering challenge. I think, as far as the grid is concerned, I think we do need to help the utilities like LA to say, if you are going 100% renewable energy, we need to give you the tools from the legislature to the local to the city councils to say, we need to allow you to actually build out the infrastructure. It is very easy to build transmission. It's very hard to get the permits to do so. So the technology is simple, but the red tape around and a lot of NIMBYism, et cetera, where people say, I don't want to look at a transmission line in my backyard, understandable, but we have a huge problem to solve going forward, creating a sustainable environment, and we need to be prepared to strike those compromises and say, if we want to clean up our act, we have to actually build infrastructure and do that. And at the same time, what really excites me about being in Los Angeles, and this being the LABC, this isn't just about us cleaning up our act here in Los Angeles / in California. First of all, I think California being the 5th largest economy, we actually are a beacon for the world. People will look at us, and if we do this right, this is where really the climate impact will come from. It's far more than the CO2 emissions that we kill by replacing a gas plant or a coal plant in Utah with clean energy. I think it's the beacon to the world to say, look, we are a real economy. We are doing this in a way that is cost effective, that not only not hurts the economy, but we can actually grow jobs. Yeah. And what I think, especially Los Angeles, which is the epicenter of this, we can be what Silicon Valley is in the computer world. Los Angeles can be that in the world for clean energy revolution. And I think that's a huge role that we're playing. So it's very important that we get it right. We get it economically right, because a lot of naysayers say, well, these guys are rich, they can do whatever they want. They can buy Teslas. Yeah. But we have to show that we can do this clean energy revolution in a way that is cost effective, creates jobs, and really serves as a beacon for all over the world. I was a couple of months ago in the British Virgin Islands, and I talked with the head of state there about transforming that island. They've been devastated by the hurricane 2 years ago, into a complete clean. They're burning diesel. Yeah. They're paying 30 to 50 cents a kilowatt hour on the generation side. This is the household's biggest expense is electricity. And I argued, I said, look, we can completely build a system here, 100% renewable energy, and power your entire island country from renewable energy, and we can do it cheaper. And their response is, well, if that were true, why hasn't anybody done it? So they're very suspicious. Everybody is looking for someone to say, we can do it. Here's how it works. Here are the numbers. The numbers are important. It can be done cost effectively. And to me, that's really exciting being in Los Angeles, that we have the chance to be the epicenter for the clean energy revolution.
Yeah, I want to just jump in for a quick second. Sure. I was at an American Public Power event, which is more than 2,000 municipal or public power utilities in the U.S., and several utilities general managers said that exact same thing. We're watching you, and they said it in a more negative way, but they said, if you can't do it, then we're just going to give up. But you're right, people are watching how we're doing this and how we're going to succeed. Yeah. And we're going to succeed, we have to succeed, And what we come up with, the model, the approach, is going to be emulated across the country. It really is.
Yeah. Everybody's watching.
Yeah,
That's absolutely true.
I'll jump in just really with one sentence. I work with state energy offices all over the country and actually chair the Association of State Energy Officials right now, which is all 50 states and territories, 6 territories. And, the politics at each state varies a lot, and some of them can't be public about it because they have a deeply red governor, say. But after the meeting, I'll get a call and say, how are you doing this? How are you spending the VW settlement money? How are you doing this this particular program? We want to pick your brain about this, from red states as well as blue states. And so it is happening across the board, and we are being examined, and there's a lot of people who want us to fail, but there are a lot of people who want us to succeed. So there's a real great vibe right now, and I think these markets are evolving faster than we ever could have hoped.
Yeah, we're in the phase of implementation. So, Ted, I wanted to ask you, and you can incorporate it into your answer, but people don't always realize that CCAs can be more than electricity providers. They can do all kinds of things, right? So demand management, work with electric vehicles, et cetera. So is that stuff going to happen soon, or do you have to wait a little while before you get all your other stuff worked out first?
Yeah, so it can't happen soon enough. But every time you establish a new company, like I was the first employee 13 months ago, so we're new, but we're going to move pretty quickly on this. So just yesterday, our board approved a strategic, a process for doing strategic planning that's going to last 6 months. That's going to develop a host of what are our programs, how are we going to spend our ratepayer dollars in doing EVs, demand response, all of those things. So we'll be rolling out a distributed energy resources pilot by January of next year. Developing a suite of local programs soon after that. I think it's exciting. It's one of the promises of the CCAs because we don't have to run that stuff by the Public Utilities Commission. We can try stuff, we can fail, and that's okay. But we can definitely experiment and innovate. I think there's sort of one thing that I think is great for Los Angeles, and glad that we've got the CCA here involved, but also a bit of a challenge that we might need some help from the people here and the people in the room. On the positive side, in terms of the plug for Los Angeles, is we're blessed with the fact that we have an electricity company, municipal utility. We've got our IOU that serves the non-municipal areas is also an electricity-only company, and the CCAs is an electricity-only company. So in terms of the partnerships and sort of the political will and the business case coming together, we're different than Northern California and San Diego, that we don't have these sort of cross business imperatives. Because really, at the end of the day, we're not competing with DWP. We're not even really competing with Edison. We're competing with oil and gas, and that I think is an important thing over the next decade to look at. The plea, though, is that if we're going to be most effective on demand response and these other things that we'd really like to do is we need data. And we need data to be shared with other public sector entities, other private sector entities. We need to have a platform of sharing so that the innovation isn't stifled by a lack of information. Because, in this new economy, he or she who controls the information sort of controls what gets done. And I'll give you a specific example. As we go out and we invest in standalone storage, we know there are local capacity areas, to the environmental justice piece, where we could, if we made that investment in the right place, we could slow or eliminate some of the ramp rate of the peaker plants that are causing so much NOx and SOx emissions and really improve air quality. Yep. So, it's, one of the things about peaker plants is it's the ramp right at 5 o'clock that is where the most emissions are happening. Once they get up to steady state, they're kind of okay, but it's in that ramp, and the faster that ramp happens, the more, the poorer the air quality is. If we can have access to the information about what circuits are around there, what that sub-area, right around those peakers, and know where to make those investments, we're not, maybe can't eliminate that peaker right away, but we can certainly slow down and eliminate some of those ramps. And that's going to have a real demonstrable impact. But right now, I don't know that. Our organization does not have the access to know where those spots are on the grid. So that could really just be a real important place where the state could step in and say, okay, here's a platform of data that everybody has access to know where in this sort of distributed implementation world we get the most innovation and the most rapid success.
Great, thanks. Gladys, back in the other coast, one of our congresswomen, Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, has proposed this Green New Deal. Does everybody know about that here? She, you know, she is a phenom, and it's the fact that everybody knows what AOC means just blows me away. But when you think about the Green New Deal and you think about California, what does a Green New Deal in California look like?
Well, I'll just start by saying I really appreciate this conversation. It's very exciting, and just feel the momentum and the energy. As we know, climate change is an unprecedented threat to all people. And so we need an unprecedented response. And this is what the Congresswoman has been talking about, that we can't wait, we can't afford to, we need to invest now. And we need to essentially get our house in order. Right? And I think Tom is absolutely right that Los Angeles and California as a whole, we are the beacon. We have to show the world how to do it. So we need a Green New Deal that can stabilize the climate and that can build local regenerative economies. We need to also act on history lessons and not make the same mistakes that the original Green New Deal made, which was exclude Black communities. And so we need to, again, ensure that our policies are centered on ensuring equity, ensuring that the most disadvantaged communities are moving forward and are benefiting, both health-wise and economically. So we need huge investment in public works projects to bring infrastructure, well-paying jobs, union jobs, and power to millions of people. So in terms of the process itself of how this is developed is really important. We need to ensure that there is meaningful involvement and participation by both workers, particularly those of the fossil fuel industry, and disadvantaged communities. So the process needs to be democratic. We need to transform our model of business from one that has served a few very well, but not served the majority very well. So in terms of the substance, I talked about needing a massive scale of investments and also research. And in doing so, in public investments, we need to ensure that we're not continuing to prop up fossil fuel industries, particularly in short-term solutions like renewable natural gas, which are really band-aids that prolong the profits of these industries, but are diverting resources that are necessary for long-term sustainable solutions. So we need the public investments to benefit the public first and foremost. We also need to think holistically about what communities need to be resilient in the face of climate change catastrophes. So not just the energy system, but housing, again, transportation, parks and green spaces, water infrastructure. And in terms of jobs, we need to spur job creation. It's a huge opportunity, but we need to go beyond just numbers. Again, we need to focus on job quality and who is accessing them. And in developing policy, we can ensure there are strings attached to the types of investments so that we ensure that workers in the fossil fuel based industry can transition into well-paying career jobs. And some of those requirements that can be inserted regarding job standards can be done at the local level. So there are local permits that are needed for construction jobs, for example, even solar, rooftop solar construction jobs. So we need to ensure there are project labor agreements, community benefits agreements. In terms of building diversified, distributed energy resources, we need to make sure that they are in disadvantaged communities, that we are placing them in strategic places where, for example, we can transition off of peaker plants. We need to convert transportation fleets, municipal and state transportation fleets, and there's a huge opportunity to ensure there's access to infrastructure such as charging stations in all communities by placing them in government-owned buildings, from public libraries to community centers, schools, and other community centers such as churches. And again, we need to phase out fossil fuel operations. We need to ensure, and this is also a job creator, ensure that they are safely shut down, that they're dismantled, that they're cleaned up, because many of these are brownfields, and that they're converted to community beneficial uses. And then lastly, we need to ensure that we have comprehensive, regionally specific climate adaptation plans. And again, particularly to ensure that the most vulnerable communities are hit first and worst and have the fewest resources to adapt and be resilient, that they are lifted in this transition. So we need proactive measures to prevent, to mitigate, recover, and thrive. And that includes, having access to healthcare, safe and affordable housing, job training and access to good jobs, cooling centers, and again, water is so huge. There are a couple of really important bills right now that will ensure that we're on the right path to have safe and affordable drinking water for the most vulnerable communities.
Great, thanks a lot. So I'm going to ask each of you to say a final sort of sentence or two just to conclude, but before I do, David, we've shortchanged electric vehicles in this conversation. We knew we were going to do it in advance, but is there something you could just say about where we need to go with that? California has pledged to have 5 million electric vehicles on the road. Mayor Garcetti's been a real leader on buses, electric buses. It sort of sounds like it's not enough, though. When you sort of compare that to 100% renewable energy, net zero buildings, it feels like this is a lagging objective. So how do you think about it? Is it possible to go much faster on electric vehicles than that 5 million number? And if we could, how would we do it?
So we need to go as fast as we can on electrification of the transportation sector because it's emitting the most greenhouse gas emissions now. And I think Gladys started moving in the direction that I'd like to look at. We need to not just look at the number of chargers that we're putting in, but the kind of chargers for what sort of vehicles and where. If you're in the transportation sector, you only make money if you're in a transportation business when that vehicle's on the road. And you want to charge that vehicle or refuel that vehicle as quickly as possible. So it might be better to put most of the chargers initially to help those medium to heavy duty units, which we have rebates for those at $5,000. Our residential rebates are $500. So you can get a lot more quantity with residential rebates, but you'd get a lot more environmental benefit by focusing on these higher level chargers. So we've got our goal of getting 25,000 chargers in place by 2025. We put 1,500, we gave 1,500 rebates just in the last 18 months, so they're moving, but we've got to refine that, and I think we need to do that as truly as a state. We're working with Southern California Edison to try to get some sort of pilot project. We haven't even defined it, from the port to the Inland Empire, so the goods movement going up and down, primarily the 710, but a number of other places, we can get that into an electrification of those heavy-duty vehicles, which they don't really exist right now, so we need to be putting research into them. On the other hand, we do need to not take the momentum for residential vehicle recharging, but it truly now is, for me, not in the numbers, but it's in the strategy of what chargers we put in what vehicles we really focus on research and rebates towards, and then doing it in a responsible manner. We are offering rebates for used electric vehicles because we think lower income customers can only afford a used vehicle. Let's provide them the benefit. And right now, as our utility, we don't offer rebates for new vehicles, but I know they're available elsewhere. But it's truly trying to look at, and honestly, it's trying to learn from the solar rebate programs how to be more equitable as we move out into what's going to be, I think, a couple decades of big rebates, big research, big reductions in cost, but a big shift in an industry that's been pretty much the same for like 100 years.
Yeah, right. Good point on the big vehicles. It makes a lot of sense, and people aren't working enough on that. So it's a measure of how much is going on, that we have moved far too quickly over too many topics. But just a last thought before we go, a sentence or two as we head out the door. Laura?
Well, I want to say one thing about that. I do think we need, obviously to electrify the transportation system, and particularly those heavy-duty vehicles. But I would like to see the bulk of the investment go into mass transit for a variety of reasons, including it feeds directly into our housing crisis and so many other issues that are important to us in Los Angeles, and equity issues and everything else. And even though we're doing a lot more than we ever did, we're not going to be a real city until I could have got here by subway. Yeah. So I think that's something we need to definitely continue to focus on. I would just say that the Green New Deal is absolutely what we need to have as our overarching sort of strategy. And there's a whole lot of on-the-ground challenges that need to be worked out. When really good, well-meaning policy doesn't pass through the legislature, it's often because of the stakeholders that are so touched by all of these policies. And I'll just say, for instance, with oil and fossil fuel and natural gas, yes, they impact disadvantaged communities the most, and they often provide the highest paid union jobs in those very same communities. And we don't have a very good plan, or really any plan, about how to get not just jobs into those communities, but jobs that are that kind of job and to the same people, because those people are not going to take it very well to say, well, you're impacted by climate change, so we're going to take your job away so you can't put food on the table. So we have to make sure that as we do things that are disruptive to very large employers, very large industries, that we have a plan to transition those workers into something that is, where we want them to go. And the same with, with our gas infrastructure, where we may say we want to electrify, and I have said it and I've done bills on it. We do have this huge investment in a natural gas infrastructure, and then we have to explain to residents why they can't have a gas stove anymore, which doesn't sound difficult, but believe me, we almost lost AB 3232 when people realized that they wouldn't be able to have a gas stove. These are environmentalists, these are Tesla drivers. So
these are committee chairs.
These are committee chairs. There's a lot of real world work that has to be done to really implement a Green New Deal, and that I'm nervous about how long that could take us to do, because I don't believe we have the time to waste, because the world is watching us, because climate change is already here. People are still in denial about it, and we have to be much bolder and move much faster. And given these huge investments and huge infrastructures, it's, I don't yet see how we do it.
Ted, we've got 3 minutes left, so
Okay.
1 or 2 sentences.
So I'm going to go real micro and say that all the choices for customers matter. So right now it's just before noon. The energy prices on a cool spring day in California right now on the CAISO might be negative, or at least are close to free. So I'm going to say no more than the fact that I'm going to get up out of my seat, go down to the basement, and plug in my car.
Tom.
Maybe I'll take a more macro look. We've talked a lot about solar, and it sometimes comes across as like solar's the new thing, right? That power plant up there has been powering us for 4 billion years. It's working great. That's where wind energy comes from. That's where fossil fuels come from, right? I mean, it was the sun that provided the energy to create them. So this is not a new thing, right? We just have to be smarter about using it directly in a way that does not screw up the environment. And climate change is a huge challenge. I think it's our generational challenge to deal with. I think it goes much further than just climate changing. I think migration in the world, etc. There's a lot of topics that relate directly to climate change. For me, what's super exciting is, being here in Los Angeles, as I said before, as the epicenter, but also we actually have the tools. This is something we can tackle. 10 years ago, we would have not been able to tackle this, but we now have the technology. We have cost-effective renewable energy. We have storage coming with huge declines in cost every year. We can solve this. We just got to do it.
Gladys?
Well, we're facing this climate catastrophe because we ignored the health and safety impacts faced daily by those communities, again, at the front lines of fossil fuel operations. Because as a society, we deemed it tolerable that we would sacrifice the lives of certain communities so that we can, pump at the gas stations, so we can have, gas stoves, et cetera. And so we can no longer bifurcate issues of air pollution and health and climate change. It's the same thing. These all come out of the same sources. So, it's factually inaccurate, it's dangerous, and it leads to legal fiction in our policies. So, again, the energy transformation and climate policies must center health and air pollution and not neglect it. And that will lead to the most effective solutions for everyone.
Thank you.
All right.
Andrew.
So there are more than 400,000 clean energy jobs in California today. The U.S. Energy Jobs Report came out a month or two ago, and it showed just this phenomenal, just huge volumes of jobs that are actually, what we're talking about, with buildings and, installations of chargers, et cetera, this whole panel, it is much more labor intensive than, a traditional large infrastructure like, oil and gas. So as the edges of the sort of monopoly characteristics of our energy infrastructures start to break down, and that there are many options for consumers to improve, be more effective with their energy consumption, improve behavior, provide all of these other non-energy benefits, with whiz-bang technology, it needs to be installed at every property, every building. And that actually, if you envision it as a local jobs effort to move to clean energy, we could double or triple that 400,000 with the right policies. And that is a win-win-win-win across the board. And I envision our quality of life actually rising tremendously, and the quality of our jobs and the work that those jobs do being high quality as the end state that we want to get to. And it seems very doable.
Yeah, great message. David, last micro thought.
Sure. What I really want to see over the next several years is us get closely, to more closely integrate the plans for the building industry, the transportation industry, power resources, demand response, and start looking at how we can get the best benefit, the biggest benefit in the shortest amount of time. As someone who does have to stand up in front of the ratepayers and tell them what the rate increases are going to be, my belief, customers will pay for what they need to, as long as it's implemented gradually. Big giant jumps cause real concerns and rejection. So I want to see us be so successful as quickly as we can, and do it in a way where we're looking at the entire across every industry, every sector that's going to be affected, and then do it in the way that we can have it be affordable and gradually increasing for customers.
Yeah, great. So microgrids, 100% renewable energy consumer choice, where you can buy 100% renewable energy yourself. Solar and storage, net zero buildings, a utility that really advantages renewable energy, clean energy, healthy communities. Seems sometimes like 10 years ago, I think we might have all thought of that as science fiction. It's actually real here in California, which is amazing. So, first off, thanks to these guys, but thanks to you also for paying attention and supporting this work. Got to keep going.
Nice job, Mr.
All right. Thanks, guys.
To kick off our spotlight sessions, please welcome the Chief Policy Officer for 5 Point Holdings, LLC, Greg McWilliams.
Wow, they told me to stand out there until the voice of God, that's what they call this, introduced me. So I'm really glad to see that sustainability and spirituality in this room have become one. So 5 Point, very quickly before I introduce two dynamic speakers, 5 Point Communities, we're the largest coastal land developer in California. We are based in San Francisco, here in Los Angeles and Orange County. We're representing well over 40,000 homes and residences for Californians and over 21 million square feet of industrial commercial. And a couple of years ago, we were honored to be able to announce here at this forum that our community of Newhall Ranch, 21,000 homes and 11 million square feet of industrial commercial, will be the first community in the nation to be net zero GHG emission and net zero energy. So with that, we have two dynamic speakers here for the spotlight session. And the first one is Javier Angulo. He's the Senior Director of Community Relations for Walmart, and he is responsible for Walmart's community and associate engagement strategy, and with a focus reinforcing Walmart's position as the most valued retail in local communities. Javier has extensive experience in the nonprofit and political sectors, having begun his career in Washington, D.C., in the Congressional Hispanic Caucus. He has also been the Director of Development for MALDEF in California, and in addition to his Walmart duties, he is currently Chairman of La Plaza and Co-Chair of the U.S. Conference of Mayors Business Council. So please join me in welcoming as a spotlight session speaker today, Javier.
Good morning, buenos dias. All right, so I know we're standing between, right now and the lunch, so I'll go ahead and get moving on this presentation. You know, it's such a great pleasure for me to be here, especially because this is an opportunity to really just talk about innovation and think about how we can all work together to move the sustainability agenda forward. Again, my name is Javier Angulo, and I've joined the company about 8 years ago, and when I joined, one of the first things I found about the company is the leadership it takes in sustainability. I also learned about LABC and learned about this summit, and since then, we have been engaged not only as a major sponsor, but also in bringing experts from our home office to talk about the latest work that we do in the field of sustainability. Now, I like to start with this photo because this is the moment, this is the aha moment when Walmart realized that we had a larger global responsibility to care for our customers and to care for the environment. This is a row of trucks waiting to go into Louisiana, New Orleans, after Hurricane Katrina. So those trucks are full of supplies, equipment, and other items to help people in Louisiana recover from the hurricanes. And we were there before any government agency was there. And so it was that moment that really told us that we have a greater responsibility to our customers and also to the global community. It was that time where we set out the 3 aspirational goals. We pledged to create zero waste, we pledged to operate with 100% renewable energy, and we also pledged to sell products that sustain our resources and the environment. So these are our priority pillars as well. Over time, we have identified broader aspirations outside of sustainability for the company through initiatives creating economic opportunity inside Walmart and beyond, and to strengthen local communities in which we operate and source. This is how Walmart views global responsibility today. All 3 cut to the heart of customer advocacy and leveraging our supply chain. One of the things that we've done is become a global leader of renewable energy. Last year alone, Walmart received 2.4 billion kilowatt hours of renewable energy, from more than 520 active projects across the world, including 18 in the US states. These projects include a range of technologies from rooftop solar to large utility-scale wind farms. Because of Walmart, an additional 850 megawatts of new, clean, renewable generation capacity has been added to grids where it operates. And I am pleased to let you know that we're just getting started. And we have contracted for another 570 megawatts to be constructed by the end of 2020, with much more to come. The other thing that we've done is energy-efficient facilities. Energy efficiency was and still is one of Walmart's core focus areas. It is fundamental to controlling expenses and make us a better company. We continue to work with equipment vendors to improve efficiency. For example, by working with folks like GE, Walmart has already replaced 1.5 million lights with high-efficiency LEDs in its parking lots, distribution centers, and offices across the country. And here we have one of my favorite programs, which is called Acres for America. Acres for America was launched on April 12, 2005 at the National Geographic Society in Washington, D.C. The goal was to protect 1 acre of land for every acre that Walmart developed. Over 1.4 million acres have been conserved thus far, 10 times our original goal, and an area larger than the Grand Canyon National Park. Locally, for example, we supported the Bolsa Chica Enhancement Project to restore and enhance habitat in the Bolsa Chica Ecological Reserve, and most recently, we gave a grant to the Trust for Public Land to help acquire the 6,000-acre Temescal Ranch, which will be the largest conservation project in Los Angeles County. Lower emissions, after over a decade of activity and achievement on sustainability, we were ready to do more. And so, in the fall of 2016, we raised the bar for ourselves and our suppliers and announced our emissions target for 2025. This included an 18% reduction in our operations by 2025 and a goal to prevent 1 billion metric tons of GHGs from entering the atmosphere between 2015 and 2030. The commitment became known as the Gigaton Project and led to the creation of this program that engages our supplier in the platform of emissions or reducing emissions. Thus, Walmart became the first retailer to set an emissions reduction plan approved by the Science Based Targets Initiative, and Project Gigaton falls under this plan in alignment with the Paris Climate Agreement. Project Gigaton, referred to as the Corporate America's Moonshot by the Environmental Defense Fund, Project Gigaton is a platform that enables us to aggregate sustainability commitments from our suppliers in one or more 6 key goal areas: energy, agriculture, waste, packaging, deforestation, and product use. It's designed so that every supplier can participate no matter what type of product they sell. The 6 goal areas we have chosen because of the meaningful opportunities to prevent upstream and downstream greenhouse gas emissions across many product categories. Walmart collaborated with the NGOs like World Wildlife Fund, the Environmental Defense Fund, and CDP to help suppliers establish emissions reduction projects or make commitments to Project Gigaton. To support suppliers, Walmart launched a digital resource center to help them establish emission reduction projects and to make commitments as part of the Project Gigaton. The Resource Center, which provides information in Mandarin and in English, includes tools, case studies, and program information on value chain emissions reduction, and that website can be found on www.walmartsustainabilityhub.com. And after the very first year, we're very excited to see 400 of our suppliers had formally signed on to the project, and hundreds more have joined since. In the first year of reporting, more than 200 of the suppliers reported emissions reductions that totaled over 20 million metric tons. And just to give you a sense of how big that impact is, 5 years prior to announcing Project Gigaton, Walmart set out a goal to reach 20 million metric tons of GHG reduction, and it took us 5 years to do that. In 1 year with Project Gigaton, we reached that and exceeded that goal. So Project Gigaton now has been expanded to the UK, China, and other countries, including the most recent Sri Lanka, since we have suppliers all over the world. More countries are in the plans for this year. While there are just a few of the results from the first year of Project Gigaton, we are excited to announce the results from our annual sustainability milestone meeting taking place next week. So if you have an opportunity, we have a summit very similar to this one. It's being held next week, and like this one, it'll be live streamed. So please check it out. That is April 10th. So with that, I'm going to end with a video that highlights one of our vendors and their buy-in to Project Gigaton.
Taylor Farms is absolutely a leader in sustainability. We have invested over $26 million towards our sustainability efforts in the last few years. It's the right thing to do. We're inspired by Walmart's initiatives around sustainability, and it's really motivating us to continue to push the boundaries for what's possible. Our growing partners are continuing to work towards more sustainable growing practices year over year. We depend on Mother Nature to take care of us, and so it's our responsibility to take care of her. So we focus on 3 different sectors within sustainability: energy, water, and waste. Energy is really where we've made our highest financial investment. We have 6 solar installations across North America. It's totaling over 5.5 megawatts of solar technology installed to date. We're continuing to look at each and every area that our facilities are located in and picking and choosing the right technology to fit to that site. Wind turbines cannot be put everywhere, and South Monterey County is a perfect place. It's literally a wind tunnel coming off of the Pacific Ocean in Monterey Bay, and it sucks it straight down into South Monterey County, and that wind turbine is producing 16 to 18 hours per day. We were really early adopters of the Bloom fuel cell technology. We put in our first system in 2012 at the Taylor Farms Retail Salinas facility. The Bloom fuel cell provides firm power for the facility using natural gas, and it uses a chemical conversion process to convert the natural gas into electricity for the facility. Renewable energy such as wind and solar is an intermittent resource, meaning that you're dependent on the sun shining or the wind blowing, whereas cogen has a pipeline of natural gas, so it's always producing power. The energy independence that we're achieving in our facilities is really unheard of in our industry, or quite frankly the manufacturing industry as a whole, and that's something we're really proud to share with Walmart and with Project Gigaton. We're really focused on water conservation around the country. We're using different technologies to help us control and maintain the water usage within our facilities to make sure that we're conserving as much water as possible. Taylor Farms is really taking our efforts towards waste reduction at our facilities very seriously. Our zero waste programs look a little bit different at each Taylor Farms site. Some are operating off of just trying to get a recycling program installed and to reduce and to manage their waste. Other facilities are going for a zero waste certification. Zero waste certification, as defined by the U.S. Green Building Council, is a 90% diversion of materials from landfills, incinerators, and the environment. It takes every single one of our team members to ensure that we are living up to our sustainable practices. I think that sustainability is about a bigger picture. I think that for us in our industry, we don't view sustainability as a competitive edge. When we find best practices that help to make us a more sustainable company, we want to share those with our partners at Walmart because it helps to make us all better in the end.
Thank you. Enjoy the rest of the day.
Great job, great job. Our second speaker is from JP Morgan Chase. It is Christina Nilsson, and she co-leads the bank's semiconductor and applied technology practice. Christina has extensive experience in the areas of artificial intelligence, robotics, internet, semiconductors, energy, and infrastructure technology. She serves as a J.P. Morgan Sustainability Ambassador, a member of the J.P. Morgan Climate Change Working Group, and J.P. Morgan Winning Women Senior Leader. Please welcome, as our next spotlight speaker, Christina Nilsson.
Thank you. Good morning. I'm honored to be here today on behalf of JP Morgan Chase to support the Los Angeles Business Council and this fantastic event. We've been a proud sponsor of the LABC since 2013, and Mary and her team have pulled together yet another year of inspiring speakers and events. So, quick background on JP Morgan. We're the largest U.S. financial institution with a history dating back 200 years. We lend money, advise companies, governments, investors, and people. More than 50% of U.S. households have a Chase relationship. And in California, we have 14,500 employees and support 1.3 million businesses. We also serve 17.4 million customers across the state, and in 2018 contributed $1 billion in financing for local nonprofits and governments. Our purpose as a firm is to help our clients succeed, contribute to value-creating markets, support global economic growth, and promote inclusive economic growth in communities where we do business. We use our lines of business and our corporate responsibility groups to deliver value and opportunity to all our stakeholders. We believe that business must play a leadership role in creating solutions that protect the environment and grow the economy. We also value the impact that our own company has across the broader ecosystem, as is informed by our more than 250,000 employees and our footprint of more than 5,500 properties covering nearly 75 million square feet of real estate. Throughout our history, we've always been proudly at the forefront of industry and economic transformation. Examples include continuous support of the financial markets, helping build global brands and economic engines, and establishing sustainability goals. Today, we continue to steward the success of new business models and the new economy, of which sustainable technology is critical. A pivotal area for our focus has been corporate responsibility. As I mentioned, our mission is to drive inclusive growth, to enable more people to share in the rewards of a growing economy. We have a multifaceted approach to corporate responsibility, including specific sustainability initiatives. Imperative for us, though, is delivering on commitments. Recent examples of these commitments are our Advancing Cities initiative, a $500 million five-year initiative to drive inclusive growth and create greater economic opportunity across cities in the world. A second opportunity that we just launched a couple weeks ago is called New Skills at Work. This is a $350 million five-year global initiative to prepare for the future of work and meet the growing demand for skilled workers. Specifically, New Skills at Work focuses on creating economic mobility and career pathways for underserved populations. Turning specifically to sustainability, we define it in broad terms, inclusive of both business targets and our own operational objectives. Specifically, in the summer of 2017, the firm announced two notable sustainability goals, one from a business perspective and one from a JP Morgan operational perspective. On the business side, we committed to facilitating $200 billion in clean financing through 2025. This includes providing advisory services, financing and risk management solutions, and debt underwriting for companies and projects focused on sustainability. So examples are an equity private placement for an electric bus company called Proterra. We've done IPOs for companies like Bloom Energy and Landis+Gyr. We've helped Apple do a $1.5 billion green bond financing. We're one of the largest tax equity investors in renewable energy, And we have a dedicated ESG research team helping investors look for responsible ways to invest their capital, which will outperform the broader index. From an operational target perspective, we've committed to sourcing renewable energy for 100% of our global power needs by 2020. This includes managing our buildings and branches sustainably through installation of solar panels, purchasing power from renewable energy projects, and reducing our energy consumption through energy efficiency technologies. As of year-end 2018, so 18 months into our commitment, we facilitated $100 billion of clean financing, so about 50% of our target, and have sourced renewable energy for 20% of our global power needs. So we are well ahead of where we were hoping to be, and I hope we will exceed our own goals. Taking a step back, though, for a moment, I want to share 3 issues and trends which are impacting our clients and that are helping shape how our company thinks about broader sustainability approach. Overarching is that science of climate change is clearer than ever. People, communities, governments, we're all dealing with severe drought, rainfall, and wildfires in direct and devastating ways. Even the San Francisco Fed is weighing in and recently summarized their findings by stating, quote, climate-related financial risks could affect the economy through elevated credit spreads, greater precautionary savings, and in the extreme, a financial crisis, end quote. So, figuring out how to mitigate climate change and also adapt to its effects are things that businesses, investors, and people have to be focused on. 3 highlights for your consideration. Number 1, it's clear sustainability issues have become a growing priority and focus for many companies. In fact, companies who have figured out how to integrate sustainability into their core business strategy are increasingly gaining a competitive advantage. Business-wise, they're working to figure out how to provide the energy from a renewables perspective to meet growing demand globally. Financially, companies see opportunities to grow market share with new products and services. They're also trying to figure out how to do more with less, driving increasing productivity from an increasingly older manufacturing and infrastructure base through the use of sustainable technology. Market-wise, companies need to appeal to a younger set of consumers who increasingly value sustainability and make their purchasing decisions accordingly. Number 2, new models. Energy, transportation, healthcare, manufacturing, food, all are fundamentally changing how and where economic value is generated, and it all has a sustainability-oriented mindset wrapped around it. Heritage companies are trying to break into these new economy models, generally through M&A or direct investment. New companies are looking for partners, both financial and strategic, to help finance and scale their businesses. And third, responsible investing. This has become the foundation of many of our clients' strategies, and having access to investment opportunities which integrate ESG has become essential. Mainstream investors are voting for sustainability with their capital. Ultimately, companies see sustainability as an opportunity to strengthen one's brand and reputation by doing business for good, by being an industry leader and an innovator. They're incorporating sustainability while continuing to reinvest in their business and deliver shareholder returns. Another major point to highlight is that the pace of change is accelerating. We're in a massive period of reimagination and dislocation. Every industry is going through a revolution as it adjusts to the realities of a technology and consumer-first oriented mindset. Assets that drive a sustained period of comparative advantage are starkly different today, and they're evolving rapidly. Incumbents protecting legacy assets are increasingly in peril, and scaled disruptors must master operating responsibly, globally, sustainably, and at scale. The output of this is an increasingly complicated world to navigate and a lot of values at stake. We still have a very supportive macroeconomic backdrop, an open capital access environment, and importantly, a market that believes sustainable next-generation technology can and will win. So, While the pace of change is accelerating, there's more capital out there than ever before. Question is, how and where do you find it, and what are investors looking for? So how do you land the capital? First off, financial markets grow when there's a strong pipeline of commercial investment opportunities that generate good returns. Good projects with solid returns, low risk, and creditworthy counterparties attract investment. Similarly, having a granular understanding of what your addressable market is and why you will win is imperative. Second, technology differentiation. Simply put, today's capital chases technology. This is where I get particularly excited because there's such strong demand from the energy industry, from the manufacturing industry, from the transportation industry, all looking to integrate sustainable technologies into their existing capability set. However, the problem is, and we get this frequently from our clients, there's not enough earlier stage energy technology or sustainable technology businesses out there for them to evaluate. Which brings me to my third point around policy and support. Governments and policymakers continue to be critically important to supporting and driving both commercial adoption as well as capital availability for earlier stage transformational companies. As a society, we need more transformational technology innovation, and we need more capital to support it. This is imperative for early stage companies who are in the beginning of their commercialization, but perhaps the issue is even more critical and stark as we consider mid-stage companies who are looking to scale and grow into market leaders with size and scale to actually enact societal and environmental impact. And here is where government policy and effective partnerships with the business community is so instrumental. So we can quickly identify companies who have the right tools to win, but perhaps have not yet identified the right pools of capital or need some tweaking with their business model in a way which will continue to enable its growth trajectory. Equally, when considering large-scale transition towards more sustainable-oriented business models, as we're seeing in energy with renewables integration, manufacturing with the scaling of automation and robotics, transportation with the proliferation of electrification, ride-sharing, and ultimately autonomous, close partnership and collaboration between the private and public sectors will continue to be imperative to fund and enable this evolution in an economic and equitable fashion. So in closing, I'm enormously optimistic about what we are doing and where we are going across the broader clean energy and sustainable technology front. There's more focus than ever on these issues from all stakeholders, and there's no shortage of capital supporting this transformational necessity. The key is unlocking the capital at scale and enabling companies to migrate through their life cycle, both on their own commercial and financial attributes and through supportive regulation and policies. We are in a period where capital markets and the macroeconomic environment remain incredibly supportive of technologies and companies which are affecting generational changes, and I encourage everyone out there working on, thinking through, and developing sustainable technologies to leverage your network and JP Morgan to take ownership and accountability and be a partner in thinking through your opportunity and how best to build it. Thank you, everyone, for your leadership.